Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is a Monday, May 19th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through the worksheet process, and if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your App Store and type in the three words HeartLand Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. And we hope people will choose to do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we would appreciate you doing so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org. Or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. You can also join us on Zoom. If you're not already doing so, if you go to your phone and enter one of the many numbers that Zoom has available, or if you open up a browser window and go to zoom.us, and then our meeting ID number is 853-2357-4173. 853-2357-4173. And once you join, it ought to automatically mute you, and if you are on your phone, you can press *6 to toggle in and out of mute. If you're joining us through the Zoom app, you can unmute yourself, and we encourage you to do so. If you have any questions or comments or feedback you'd like to offer, we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service, And that is just so much easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. So please feel free to chime in and offer your feedback or input. We've just had a weekend, and so we have not been on the air for Saturday or Sunday. I was pausing because my brain was asking me to comment about how Michael and Jeanie are going to be on Zoom this afternoon, because there's been a substantial set of issues that arose with the Needle app that have required them to request that we not use it until they can get some serious issues resolved. So now Michael and Jeanie are going to be on Zoom, and they have a separate meeting ID. So we'll have the 2 separate hours, but on the same platform. And Dr. Michael Ryce has sent out an app or a text to update people. And their meeting ID is going to be 846-138-24189. 846-138-24189. And it's all the same technology. These recordings will then be available on, they're supposed to be available on all the podcast platforms. Recently, we've been notified that there's a glitch on Spotify and iHeartRadio and Amazon, but Apple, the Apple podcast is up to date, and we're looking into getting it. Whatever glitches are with iHeart and the other podcast platforms, getting them brought up to speed. So thanks again for being here. We are encouraging you to raise a question, have a comment, give us some feedback, because it is always viewed as an addition. And as we talk about how certain of these shows, they can't all be, gems in their own right, but every once in a while, somebody will say, oh, that show was so good, that should be in the best of, or that should be a highlight show, or can I get a copy of that? I want to listen again. And the vast majority of those shows over the last 14 plus years have been the product of people just like you asking a question, making a comment, or giving a testimonial. So please feel free at any point, whether I seem to be in the middle of reading something or in the middle of a monologue, raise a hand, ask a question. I believe when I was reading on Friday, I'm reading from the essays in the book A Walk in the Physical by Christian Sundberg. And I believe where I left off was in the middle of one of these essays titled Faith Transcends Belief. And years ago, when I was listening to a talk from Guy Finley, he mentioned something, and I blended that with my awareness, my growing awareness at that time about how much better my life has gotten the more I identify any kind of a belief or a dogma or a ritual I'm engaging in and question it and often interrupt it. And it led to a story about beliefs. And there was a land where it was covered with toxic sludge. And there were these little islands that people lived on. And from their islands, they had manufactured this toxic, acidic resistant material. And there wasn't enough of it to cover all of the land that had the sludge on it, toxic sludge on it. So they created these little platforms. They were like little pillows, little air platforms, and there wasn't enough to make walkways, but there was enough for everybody that lived there to have two of these pillows. And they would navigate around in this land by putting one of these pillows or little balloons down in the direction they want to travel, and then step on it and put the next one down in whatever direction they wanted to go, and then reach behind them and pick up the one that they were just on and put it down. And in this way, they were free to go wherever they wanted to go throughout the land. But they always had to step on their balloons because if they stepped in the toxic sludge, it would be disastrous. It was acidic and it was poisonous, it would burn their skin, etc. So the thing about being in this land was that if it was a nice, quiet, wind day and no storms or whatever, people could be out and move around. However, they were always wary. They were always concerned that wind might come up and whip this sludge around, or there might be a storm, and it would be, really, really bad to get caught out in a strong wind or the storm. So they're always just rushing from one place to another on their balloons. And after a while, years and years of this, they decided to shape these different balloons just aesthetically to make them more pleasing, like the shape of leaves of trees. And they would, get these leaf-shaped balloons. They call them balloon leaves, and they would use them quite efficiently to move around the land. But everybody knew you don't want to go anywhere you don't have to go, and you don't want to stay outside longer than you absolutely have to, etc. And it had been generation after generation after generation of people that were raised in this land that knew the truth, that you just got to rush around whenever you're outside and get inside fast, etc. Well, as fate would have it, occasionally young people would come along and they'd be adventurous and they'd want to venture out away from this little cluster of islands. And of course, the adults would always scold them for that, and you'd get in big trouble if you were too far away, because what would happen? This is, if your if your balloon leaves weren't inflated, you'd be stuck, right? Or trapped or worse. But this one young woman had this adventurous spirit, and she kept venturing further and further, farther and farther away from her home. And there was this out at the edge of this expanse of toxic sludge, there was this solid land. And their history was that you don't ever step on the solid land because nobody who's ever done that has ever come back. Nobody survives. And you wouldn't want to put your balloon leaf up on solid land because if one of them punctures, then you can't get back home. Or you'd have to wait, hoping that somebody might come out here to rescue you. But as she ventured out, the closer she got to that solid land, the more she thought she heard something. The more, just out of the corner of her eye, she thought she might have seen something move on this very desolate, barren, solid land. And one day, after many, many times that she ventured closer and closer, she decided, against every terror that was in her heart, to explore what happens if I step on that land. And she got close and she put one of her balloon leaves on that solid land, and she stepped on it and reached behind her and picked up the other one. And she was going to put it down on solid land, and then she thought, what if I just step on solid land? And ignoring, being fully aware of, but not listening to the terror in her heart, listening to her adventurous spirit, she stepped off. Now, at this stage of the game, these balloon leaves, a lot of times these younger folks, being radical and all, they would just call them bee-leaves, bee leaves just for short. And she stepped off of her bee leaf onto solid land. And when she did, instantly, people were there, cheering, shouting, singing, music was playing. And it's a good thing she was young. It would have given her a heart attack. Just out of nowhere, all these people showed up. And they swept her away from the edge of the land where the toxic sludge was, and they carried her away singing and joyfully dancing. And as she was sitting around the fire, just shaking in shock from all of this, one of the older women in the group came over and put her arm around her and said, there, baby, it's all right, you're fine. And the young woman said, how could this be? How could you people be here? There's nothing here. I've been, using my bee leaves to explore this part of the country, and I've never seen anything. There's never been anybody here. Where did you all come from? And the older woman comforted her and said, honey, we understand, but we've always been here, and we're always cheering for you, and we're always hoping that you and your people will eventually step off of your bee leaves onto solid ground. Come and join us in life, in direct observational life. Everybody that lives from a belief is living, as Krishnamurti would say, from an old, dead thought. You're living in the past. Michael Ryce says, you're living in the past. Your perceptions, your beliefs, your judgments have all been programmed into you by your family, by your culture, by your language, by your past experiences. And to some degree, my past experiences as a teacher are a good thing. In certain areas, it's a very good thing. And yet, my past experiences can't ever take me to what is new. As Guy Finley likes to say, the new can't be known. The new is always changing. The new is fluid, just like life itself. So here's an essay from Christian Sundberg in the book A Walk in the Physical that is titled Faith Transcends Belief. And he writes, in the context of your belief system, especially a religious one, if you are feeling doubt, it is a sign that your reason is compelling you to explore. It's okay to follow your reason. What he writes is, quote, big truth, close quotes, is not make-believe. It's not a fantasy. And big truth doesn't require your belief in order for it to exist. Only your ego requires things to be a certain way. If you genuinely seek truth, you will look fearlessly into your own history and experience your own reaction to it all. If you look close enough, you will see that your beliefs have deeply colored and created your experience. If you look closely, you'll see that your beliefs have deeply colored and created your experience. I'm reaching over here to look at the book, A Way of Mastery. And in the third lesson, it says, to forgive means to choose to release another from the perceptions you have been projecting upon them. It is therefore an act of dismantling one's own projections. And as you begin to forgive or dismantle your projections, even 70 times, 7 times, each time you dismantle your judgments and projections, you take yourself deeper into the purity of your own consciousness. And now here's what made me pull this up. So here we're reading from Christian Sundberg, and he says, if you look close enough, you will see that your beliefs have deeply colored and created your experience. And here in The Way of Mastery, it says, you begin to see how profoundly you have been coloring and therefore affecting all of your relationships through the simple act of not being aware of the power of projection. A little bit earlier in this chapter, he says, I began to realize that the greatest gift that could ever come to me, that would ever be possible for me to receive, could only come to me as I chose to surrender, give up, dismantle every perception that I might conjure up about you, my brother or sister. Because every judgment and every perception I create hides from me the truth that is true about you always. What's that? Is that you are just as I am. You are an extension of this creative energy expressing in form. So if you look close enough, you will see that your beliefs have deeply colored and created your experience. In addition, if you consistently take the time to explore deeply into the present moment, beyond your thoughts and judgments, into your awareness itself, you will find that your awareness is fundamental to every experience you have ever had. And your intellectual thoughts about it, your intellectual justifications for it, and beliefs about it are not fundamental. You, your essence, consciousness, your awareness has persisted and endured, while the thoughts and forms that you've entertained come and go. Again, you are not your thoughts. You are not who you think you are. You are because you were given this spark of consciousness. He writes, faith, then, is not about simply finding an idea and holding on to it with tenacity. Faith is setting your deepest intent in the, quote, right direction, close quotes. The right direction is towards love and the Creator. No matter what you call it God, call it light, call it love, call it life. The words love with a capital L and God with a capital G are just an attempt to encompass many aspects of truth which vastly transcend all human language. So there's no way any word, any thought, any religion, any dogma can contain the truth of life or the source of creation. But we use these words anyway, but they're all we have at this point in time. And we might say that they include, once you're setting your intent on love and God and all that is, you might say they include fearlessness, personal responsibility, active relationship with your true source, peace, acceptance, humility, surrender, joy, creativity, being fully present in the current moment, and it includes the intent to strive to put the needs of others before yourself, which is a misnomer because we're all connected. So what they're talking about here is to sidestep the egoic tendency to think it is more important than the whole of life itself. Christian goes on and writes, genuinely pursuing all of that is both much more challenging and much more rewarding than any idea of holding on to an intellectual dogma, creed, book, name, or idea. You cannot contain life in a symbol of a symbol. What's a symbol of a symbol? A word is a symbol of a symbol. The first symbol is your mind creates some kind of an image every time you create a perception. And then when your mind creates an image through your perception, another part of your mind puts a label on it. Oh, that's a tree, that's a chair, that's a rock, that's a cloud. If you genuinely pursue the idea of holding your intention on moving closer to or acting and speaking from love and from your source, if you actively include that in your intention, if you hold your intention on that, which includes holding an intention to be fearless, having personal responsibility, an active relationship with the source of your being, peace, acceptance, humility, joy, creativity. Genuinely pursuing all of those things is much more challenging and also much more rewarding than holding on to any creed, dogma, book, name, or idea. So hear this, this teaching is acknowledging this is a bigger challenge than just reciting what your religion tells you to recite and what your religious books and hymns would have you chanting or singing. This is more challenging by far. What you call God vastly transcends the forms you may identify her by. So when you select a form, it doesn't really matter what you call her, who you call her, what you call it or him or her. That being said, we are admittedly physical beings living in dualism, so the form or the pursued belief can, for a while, in fact, can be extremely important. Religion often serves this extremely meaningful purpose. But at the same time, it may have a purpose at certain levels of your development. When you're ready, it can also be liberating to realize that the form or the belief is simply not the active ingredient. Spirit, which we might also call, quote, life, close quotes, or, quote, awareness, close quotes. Spirit, your essence, your consciousness, your being is the thing that is real. And what they're calling here, quote, the active ingredient. The active ingredient is the mobilization of that spirit. It gets mobilized by your intention. Your intent transcends the forms of your mind, even as it works through those forms. You can, at any moment, let your faith transcend belief. When you glance upon truth, there is no doubt. You know it in a way that resonates perfectly with the true goodness in your soul. This is because at their deepest root, all things, including you, all things always exist within harmony, love, and perfect beingness. If you feel conflict, resistance, pressure, or fear in the moment, in that moment, you're not operating from a place of higher truth. And that's okay. It's absolutely okay. You, as part of the creative process, you utilize your experience of duality and contrast to expand and to create. Nonetheless, your personal decision in any and every given moment to choose loving content versus fearful intent is truly important. It's the very reason this reality exists. This reality exists to give you that opportunity to choose love and to conquer fear. Faith, then, is always striving for the divine, however you may personally define it. Faith simply means always striving for the divine, no matter how you define it. Faith is choosing to embody pure, loving, selfless intent. Faith, so they're redefining faith here. Faith is choosing to embody pure, loving, selfless intent. Faith is always the greater truth and mighty river of capital S sources ever-present love. Allowing that love to flow through you in whatever your circumstances, regardless of the forms involved. And to have it flow through you means you will speak and act from that energy. So they're redefining faith here in this work with Christian Sundberg. Faith then is always striving for the divine, however you may personally identify it, whatever you may call it. Faith is choosing to embody pure, loving, selfless intent. Faith is allowing the greater truth and the mighty river of source's ever-present love, allowing it to flow through you in whatever your circumstances, regardless of the forms involved. And this puts me to mind of the definition from the ancient Aramaic that Dale Allen Hoffman brings to us about the word faith. Faith from the ancient Aramaic, I don't remember the ancient Aramaic word, but it's translated into something in Greek and Latin and then eventually English as the word faith. But the meaning in the original Aramaic was acting from the rooted center of my being. In other words, before I speak or act, getting consciously focused on my true nature. Have a conscious connection to my source. Faith is not about blind adherence to someone's model of thought. Faith, in this ancient Aramaic sense, is taking an action only after becoming centered in my true nature, having my conscious awareness focused on my true nature. Acting from the rooted center of my being. And if I'm doing that, if I become aware of my true nature, if I ask to be taught by life in the moment, if I choose to focus, as Christian Sundberg is talking here in this essay, if I choose to focus my intent on love, on my source, I need not worry about what happens next. I certainly don't need to figure it out with my conscious logical mind. So that was the second essay in the series of the theme titled Freedom from Belief. And we've read some of these before. Some of these essays show up in more than one grouping of themes, but this next one is titled Growing Beyond Belief. And Christian writes, no matter what the belief, people will tend to find data to support it. If you listen to Dr. Michael Ryce, he says this is what's going to happen. If I say to myself, if I say to you, you made me angry, I'm telling my mind, which is an evidential device, only show me the data points that prove to me that this other person in front of me is causing my anger. That's exactly the wisdom. That's exactly the observation that Christian has here. No matter what the belief, people will tend to find data to support it. In fact, over a lifetime, we tend to assemble a complex fortress of data to support what we already believe. As we do this, most of us believe that our viewpoint is what we call, quote, true, close quotes, and that the viewpoint of anybody else that's contradictory to that is, quote, false, close quotes. Or at least it's not quite as accurate as ours. Furthermore, many believe some forms, whether they are ideas, beliefs, identities, or actions, some of them are inherently good and others are inherently evil. To those who are so deeply accustomed to living in a universe of duality, this can seem natural. Well, of course, it seems obvious. It is obvious, especially if you don't understand that you're making it all up. It is obvious if you believe that your perceptions are the truth of life. If you haven't been introduced to the idea that you're hallucinating your perception, and we all are, and I routinely send people to the video by Anil Seth. His first name is Anil, A-N-I-L. His last name is Seth, S-E-T-H. Go to YouTube, type in Anil Seth and perception, and have a listen. He's a researcher, researching perception, and it'll open your eyes to the idea that a lot of people who've looked at this understand. We are not seeing things accurately. We are seeing things based on what we've already been taught, what we want to believe, what we want to see, what we want to have happen, what judgments we're holding, what triggered emotions are active for us in the moment. That's how we see. We're seeing our mind's best guess, our brain's best guess. So Christian goes on here and writes, at the deepest level, there is fundamental truth with a capital T. And yet that truth transcends every bit of form in the physical universe. It transcends all of the ideas, all of the words, all the beliefs, all the objects, all of the contrast. While there is no word that can name it, since words are also from the world of form, perhaps we can attempt to speak to that capital T truth by using this one simple word, capital L-O-V-E. love. While other forms themselves are not innately good or bad, since a consciousness must always assign a meaning to them in order to have them have meaning, the movement of consciousness through intent does either align more closely or less closely to this capital T truth or to the divine love. That is why it's so very important to deeply explore the nature of your own motivations, and whenever possible, to choose to act from loving intent, because loving intent will align with capital T truth, the truth of life itself. And we prefer the results long term when we choose to align with loving intent rather than fearful intent. Loving intent might also be described as selflessness, personal responsibility, humility, and acceptance. Loving intent includes the willingness to be wrong and to seek out truth and to grow in acceptance and service of others, even at the expense of your thoughts about yourself or at the expense of what you have previously believed. One of the main challenges is that our beliefs tend to become invisible to us. They tend to appear to us to be assumptions about how reality really is, rather than beliefs. In other words, once our beliefs are set, the data that arrives in our minds almost always appears to support the existing belief. But in fact, the same data is being utilized by different conscious participants in different ways. This reminds me of some research that was done, had to be 15 or 20 years ago now, that was being reported on public radio. And they were talking about what are the odds someone will believe new information, real rock solid, demonstrably true information that conflicts with what they already believe. And what the research showed quite clearly is, if it's pretty close to what I already believe, the chances are better that I'll let it in. But if it's too far away from what I already believe, I shut my mind off and I won't let it in, despite the fact that it's the absolute capital T truth. Examples of that, I think about all of the different waves of immigrants that have come to this country, and each of them in turn have been looked at as lesser. And so if you were raised in a family that believed that, here's a family that moves in next door and they're Italian and you're Irish, and you've been taught that the Italians are bad people, and you've been taught that your whole life. It may be impossible for you to see the people who moved in next door as really nice people, and that they may be acting as really nice people from the beginning. But your mind will give you evidence that they're not so nice, or they're not to be trusted, or they're not human like you are. The last paragraph in this essay says, we often don't think about spiritual growth in this way. Instead, we fight for the form, in other words, our thoughts, our beliefs, our dogmas, our rituals. We try to make sure that our way of seeing the world is perpetuated. We keep it going. We worry about it, we fret, and we fight to make the rest of the world adapt to the correctness of what we believe is right. However, the correctness of belief is not what this universe is about. We're here to develop the quality of intent, our quality of intent, the quality of ourselves as truly loving and authentic beings. That's why we're here, according to this teaching. The only reason for you to have a body, the only reason for you to have a lived experience on this planet is to grow your quality of intent towards love. We are here to face our fears and to accept personal responsibility. We are here to actually accept and support one another. Being here to accept and support one another is more important than any claim of form. Any claim of form means any claim of knowledge that is written, that was handed down, that is a belief system or a dogma or a ritual. This is more important than any of that. To be refining, strengthening your ability to choose for love in more and more difficult circumstances. That's the teaching in this work. I like the idea of looking at source material. And for a lot of my life, all the way through college, or at least to get into college, I was ushered away from source material, and I was given beliefs to recite and chant and build my life around in the Catholic faith. And really, really strong conditioning, if you consider that 6 days a week, unless I was deathly ill, I was sitting in a church listening to a mass and being prompted to say the prayers and read the creeds and sing the hymns, etc. 6 days a week. We got a break during the summer because we'd only have to go to mass on Sundays. And we went to mass on Sundays, even when we were out camping. My parents would find a church and get us dressed up in the best clothes we had out camping, and literally there would be a separate set of suitcases for the church clothes. So eventually, when I got to college, it was quite a tough nut to crack to start taking a look at what's the truth about all these different religions? What's the truth about which one's actually the truth, and what's the truth about how so many wars on this planet have been fought because one person's belief system conflicted with another's? What kinds of atrocities, as we would call them, what kinds of violence, what kinds of harm to other human bodies, what kind of nasty comments have been hurled back and forth at people because of difference in belief? And I just encourage people to look at this from themselves. And if you choose to follow a religion after having looked at all of that, it's your choice. However, it's been my experience that most people have never even opened up to question it. Now, most people, regardless of how intelligent they are reading from within the cycle of whatever religion they've been taught. That's why it was so inspiring to me that a number of years ago, a group of people, mostly women, but a group of people from the Christian Science tradition, where they're strongly encouraged not to read anything spiritual that doesn't come directly from the religious science, speaking, the book itself, um, Science and Health with the Keys to the Scriptures, or books from Mary Baker Eddy herself, or somebody who's been giving a talk because they've been somehow led into the Christian Science speakers circuit, And these people got together and said, we want to read other stuff. And we want to do a book club on books other than Christian Science books. And as fate would have it, they asked me to moderate that book club. And I was inspired by that. I mean, here are people that are trying to break out of a cycle of thought, a cycle of programmed belief, and just open themselves to question what value might there be in some different spiritual questioning or different spiritual teachings. And that's part of why I say every time I introduce the internet show that we're grateful that you're here, because you're here to help yourself question things anew. So the next essay in this segment, since no one has raised a hand, is titled The Authority of Awareness. And Christian writes, the fact that you are aware gives you authority to explore what is real. The fact that you are aware gives you authority to interpret what you perceive. In the individual sense, your awareness is, quote, what is, close quotes. Its powers of experience, interpretation, and choice are fundamental to awareness. You can bind yourself to a much more limited choice set or interpretation set based on your beliefs, but fundamentally, you are free to interpret absolutely everything as you will. Most of the beliefs that you get have been passed down to you and hardened over many lifetimes. And yet, you're still free to question them and interpret them as you will. You may temporarily wear the clothes of limited interpretation within a defined experience, and yet on a fundamental level, you cannot be anything but utterly free. Your absolute true nature is consciousness itself, and consciousness is free. He writes, in the big picture sense, God's awareness is ultimately just what is. It doesn't have to answer to any other system or entity, because what is just is. This is like what Byron Katie says, I came to realize that everything that's already happened is just perfect. How can I know it's perfect? Because it's happened. Because I don't have a time machine to go back and fix it. Because the flow of life is just the flow of life, unless there's a human around, there's a consciousness around that chooses to label it. This is good, that's wrong, that's bad, that's happy, that's sad, that's tragic, that's overwhelming. But in the big picture sense, what is just the flow of life. You are a part of that flow of life. Metaphorically, you're a drop in the ocean, and yet you're still the ocean itself. You are the entire ocean in a drop. Your very being is rooted in and seeks to be in this loving, creative service to the entire vast ocean that you most fundamentally belong to. You belong to this vast ocean. You belong to the flow of life itself. This authority of awareness is important to recognize because we live in a world where our own fundamental power to interpret how we choose to experience life has been covered over and hidden from us beneath this extremely deep history of disempowering belief. We are so free, you see, that we've created even this experience of this deep history of disempowering belief. We're free to pretend we're tiny. We're free to pretend we're powerless. And even so, many of us now are choosing to wake up to our power, to wake up to their profound personal responsibility, to wake up to the fact that you are consciousness itself, that you have the capacity to experience life as you choose to experience it. You have the capacity to wake up to your true nature, which transcends physical illusion. If you wish to participate in that awakening, you deserve to know that you have the authority to question everything. Question every belief, question every thought, question everything about anything you've been taught. And if you believe otherwise, it's because you've bought into that interpretation. You've bought into what you've been taught by life. You've bought into what you've been taught by your family, by your parents, by your culture, by your language. And it's okay. That's at the root of this teaching. It is okay for you to question everything. And yet some of us and some of our teachers forget that it's okay. And they get all excited and agitated and upset because, they say, oh, you better hurry up and, the time is now and it's urgent and it's important. It's not urgent. It's not important. It's your life. It's your consciousness. You're free to stay asleep. You're free to wake up. You're free to believe whatever you want to believe in terms of your rituals and your religion, and you're free to question it all. That's what this teaching and so many others say. And please remember, as we like to bring up often in this Mind Shifters Radio, it's more about the teaching, far more about the teaching than the teacher. So if you have a teacher who is, raising his voice and getting angry and saying, doggone it, it's urgent and you got to do it now, that's the individual, that's the egoic mind of that teacher that's missing the root of the very teaching that they're professing to teach. And that's okay too. It's absolutely okay because it's happening. And as it happens, you're free to say, oh, okay, so this is happening. I wonder how I can choose to be a blessing to myself and others in this moment. I wonder how I can choose to add loving energy through my loving intent to this moment, to extend my true nature of love and awareness in this moment. That's the source of this teaching. That's what we're trying to encourage all of us to step into. And I realize that we're almost out of time. We have a couple things that have shown up in the chat. Let's see if I can get access to them. Donald was talking about confirmation bias. Yes, it's a very, very big thing. We are what we believe shapes how we perceive. And Sally says she used to have a sign in her office which said, question everything and love shall set you free. So just a reminder that the second hour today is going to be with Dr. Michael Ryce and Jeanie on Zoom. And their meeting ID number is 846-138-241-89. 846-138-241-89. And for updates, please go to whyagain.org and sign up for their newsletter. And I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff that we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Blessings.